My name is Dan Tripoli. I'm going to chair this meeting or facilitate it, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience here in Seattle as an educator, both as an activist and a teacher, I guess. When I first started working as a teacher here in Seattle, Jesse and I started the group, the Social Equality Educators, which if you're a teacher in this room and you're not a member of Social Equality Educators, you need to rectify that problem right now. I'll pass this around. If you're not a teacher but you're interested in public education issues, sign up for it. It's a rather moderate list that Jesse and I moderate. One of the first things that we did in C, we were fortunate enough to get together with educator activists in the American Federation of Teachers, the other teachers union that we are part of the National Education Association. They were having their convention here in Seattle, and at their convention, we were unfortunate enough to listen to Bill Gates speak. Yeah, you can hiss. He's got a lot of negative things to say about education, but he did talk about how he knew something about teaching when he worked with his 2 kids on homework and stuff. He was joking. He did say that obviously his class size was a little bit more manageable than most teachers. However, this was just a slightly more manageable. But this is one thing that he actually rather dismissed pretty quickly and went on to talk about more important reforms in his mind, like charter schools, merit pay, and value-added teacher evaluations. I feel to some degree that teachers definitely similarly paint themselves in a corner when we accept that limited funds are the confines in which we have to work and try to imagine innovations for education that will somehow escape the fact that more and more of our students are coming to school hungry, they're coming to school without health care, they're coming with homeless, the fact that our class sizes are going up, that the budget for basic materials in the classroom is going down, and things like the arts are just getting gutted from our public schools. We accept these confines and try to innovate our way out of this. In Seattle here, we recently, the union participated and is working with the district in the Creative Approach Schools, or as I like to call it, CRAS. The CRAS situation where we're trying to innovate our way, even though the state of Washington has cut billions of dollars over the last handful of years in education. It puts us in a situation where instead of blaming a system where the banks get bailed out and schools get closed, parents and teachers are more prone to point the finger at each other. And this is a problem. So what do? We fight. We're activists. We fight. And we've been defending public education for so long that progressive education and pedagogical experts really haven't had the time and the space to debate fully what we could do to actually improve education, and address questions like, what is education's function in our society? How can we fundamentally transform it so that it can go from a drill and kill test prep machine to something that an institution that actually completely encourages the complete development of all children. And so to help us answer some of these questions, Haymarket Books put out Education and Capitalism. Yes. So tonight we'll hear from 2 of the contributors. The first is one of the editors, Sarah Knopp. She's a public high school. I'm going to read from the text or from the book because I don't want to get it wrong. She's a high school teacher in Los Angeles. She's been teaching economics and government since 2000. She's a frequent contributor to the International Socialist Review. She's also written for Rethinking Schools, Counterpunch, and United Teacher. She's an activist in United Teachers Los Angeles and a union co-chair. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you, and thanks to the folks who organized this meeting. I'm coming from a district, Los Angeles Unified School District, where we have 6,000 teachers who've been pink slipped this year. 2 of our schools are being reconstituted right now. I'm sure people are familiar with some of the turnaround models that the education deformers or reformers, like the ones that Dan talked about, are doing. I'm not going to really focus my remarks today on what's going on in Los Angeles Unified School District, but I do think that hopefully we get to share, some war stories about what's going on in our fight here and in our fight in Los Angeles and across the country, because if we don't form a national coalition of teachers to flip the script about what's going on right now, about who's being blamed for the crises in education and the crisis of poverty in our society, we're going to be sunk. So we really need those sort of networks, and I think that's what everyone here is talking about. Are there how many people in the room are teachers? Awesome, thank you for being here on a Saturday. What about teachers? Anyone from teachers from Tacoma here? Yay, great, I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to thank you personally so much for standing up in the way that you guys did with your strike, and standing up against scripted curricula and so on, because it makes our case in Los Angeles so much easier when we say, look, if we don't stand up and fight this stuff, they're just going to keep cramming it down our throats, and if we do stand up, we can actually win. And I think that's where people are pessimistic, is that if we do stand up, we can actually win. So in LA, we had a 1-hour strike in 2008. We had 20,000 parents join us on our picket line. It was an illegal 1-hour strike. It was awesome. And then we had we had a 1-day strike planned in 2009 that ended up getting called off, and really I think that things have been going downhill for our union since then. So I do think it's so important what you guys did, what hopefully people have been following, the teachers in Oregon who've been on strike, and 4 school districts have taken a strike vote in Oregon. This just really helps us to make the case that there is no, the movie Waiting for Superman, right? There is no Superman coming to save us. If teachers aren't willing to stand up for ourselves and for public education right now, it won't be safe, and people need to really understand it. There's no one you can elect into office to solve this problem right now, not in our unions, not in the national or statewide government. There's no savior. We're going to stand up for ourselves, or we're going to lose what modest stuff we have right now. So I'm going to focus my remarks today on education and capitalism, and I think really the point of the book is best summed up by a guy named Raul Ferrer, who was the guy who wrote the Cuban literacy campaign for what they did after their revolution in 1959. And here's what he said. He said, ever since the student upheavals in Paris of May of 1968, hundreds of people have been traveling the world in an attempt to isolate the crisis of our pupils from the moral struggles of our times. It's a gross diversion. We deny that there's a crisis in the schools. It's not a crisis in the classroom, it's a crisis of the social order. And I think you really couldn't say it any better. This is the situation into which we're graduating students out of our schools right now. 1 in 4 adults in the U.S. works in a poverty zone job. So poverty zone is defined as minimum wage and up to 125% of minimum wage. Out of all the jobs that are opening up right now, 7 out of the 10 jobs that have the most openings require less than a bachelor's degree. Okay, it starts to then make sense what's going on with them squeezing our students out of the university. There's 25% unemployment rate for blacks and Latinos. And in the year 2011, there were 4.4 job seekers for every job opening in the U.S. Jesse's going to talk a little bit more about what we think is really going on with the neoliberal economy right now. But this is the economy that we're graduating our students into. And so it really makes you examine what, the classic lecture that everyone has either heard from their high school teachers or given, which is if you want to, give yourself a steady, middle class lifestyle, you have to go to school and get an education, and education is going to be your ticket out. And it really makes you examine that when we look at the economy that we're graduating our students into. And furthermore, I take it a step further, one thing that students realize as soon as they graduate is that despite all this talk that you get in high school in your civics class about democracy and equal access and one person, one vote, and it's worth saying we do have some limited democracy in the political realm in this country in a very narrow sense. We have, political democracy. But when you go into the workplace, economically, we live in a dictatorship because the decisions, despite the fact that we all cooperate and collaborate at work to get the job done, the decisions about how to use our resources in this society, the decisions about how much to pay people or working hours or what we're producing or, what work actually looks like, those decisions are made by a tiny, tiny group of private individuals. And so there's a clash between the ideology that we get in schools about democracy and equality of access, and then what happens to you when you go to work. 3 of the characteristics of education under capitalism that I'd like to just briefly highlight. Again, schools don't exist in a vacuum. Schools are reflections of the society in which we're living. So the first thing is that since we live in a very racist society, schools, play a role in terms of reinforcing racism. 73% of black children today attend a segregated school. So that's a little bit better than it was before the civil rights movement, but only a tiny little bit better than it was before the civil rights movement ever happened. By the time that they are in middle school, 28% of black male middle school students will be suspended. Middle school. By the time 1 out of 4 roughly black male middle school students will be suspended. The statistic for white males is 10%. At UCLA and at Boulder, they collaborated on a really great study about racism in our schools, and they said, well, okay, what do you say to those racist people who say, oh, well, those kids just are behavior problems. Those kids just, misbehave more. So they controlled for that, and they said, okay, we're gonna control for people who, we're only gonna look at students who already get caught doing something wrong. So they looked at public display of affection, and they found out that if you're black, you're 3 times more likely to get suspended for public display of affection than if you're white. Well, this is kids who already get caught for doing it. So, we live in an incredibly racist society, and so our schools are incredibly racist. Number 2, there's a mythology about our schools that they're supposed to be a social leveler. They're supposed to even the playing field and give everyone an equal opportunity. But much more often they actually act as a sorting ground. And I think there's no better, I'm not going to go into the testing thing here because I'm kind of assuming that everyone in this room is really on the same page about the crime that's being committed to our children in the name of testing. But I mean, there's no better example than the fact that schools are actually helping to sort students into an economic hierarchy than what the tests do. Jesse wrote a great article for Socialist Worker where he talked about how actually the SAT test, and that's just the tip. SAT test is just the tip of the iceberg, right? But the SAT test was developed by a guy named Carl Brigham, who was an army psychologist and a figure in the eugenics movement. So during the First World War, Brigham was instrumental in collecting data to prove that whites born in the U.S. were the most intelligent of all peoples. And he also found evidence showing that immigrants were genetically inferior. This is the guy who developed the SAT test. And so, project that forward into the testing movement that we're seeing today. And how does it make any sense that at schools that perform worst on the test, these are schools that get shut down and get their funding cut? And think about the role that tests are actually designed to play. I'm not going to go too much into that because I think people who've either been to school or are teachers kind of get the point about testing. The third characteristic of education in a capitalist society, I think that it has much more to do with conditioning the behavior of our future workers, even than it does in terms of teaching those low-wage skills that, a lot of people say, well, that, our schools are just really set up to teach people like low-wage math and English skills that they need to get a, basic janitorial job or basic low-wage job. We don't even really teach kids the skills that you need for entry-level, low-wage jobs. An example, I have like 40, I teach world history, I have 40 students in most of my classes. I have 2 computers and 40 students in most of my classes. So I would say that using a computer, the internet, word processing, I would say that that's a pretty entry-level skill in our economy today. And we're not even really giving the students those entry-level skills. Most skills that you need, you actually really learn on the job. But what we do is we teach children the kind of behaviors that they need to be obedient workers. So there was a study that's cited in the book Schooling in Capitalist America, which is a real classic, written in 1976 by Herbert Goals and Gintis. And they cite this study that shows that your GPA is actually correlated to your personality traits. So the personality traits that will predict that you'll have a good GPA are character, work ethic, dependability, perseverance, consistency, willingness to follow orders, punctuality, and the ability to delay gratification. Those are good personalities. I was kind of like, yeah, my GPA was okay. I don't know what that says about me. Kind of like disturbed when I read that. And then the personality traits that correlate negatively to GPA. So if you have these, you are more likely to have a bad GPA. Are creativity, interestingly, aggressiveness, and independence. And we've all seen, we've all either gone to school or taught in schools and seen the role that schools play in reinforcing these these behavior norms. So what's the point? I'm going to hand it over to Jesse, but I just wanted to say that the point of this book, 13 of us who are public school teachers got together to write this book, and I think really the inspiration for it was thinking about, if anyone's ever seen the bumper sticker that says knowledge equals power, you know, and it's like the best people get into the teaching profession because they really believe in this slogan, knowledge equals power, and people are passionate about that moment that happens when you see the light bulb go off in someone's head, or when someone becomes passionate about reading something or investigating something or debating something, and that sort of spirit of enlightenment, I think, is what people are really passionate about. And we wrote the book as a plea to teachers to say, look, first of all, if you want to even defend the basic things we have around public education, you don't have the luxury of just staying in your classroom and trying to do the best job you possibly can in your classroom. We need you right now in the streets and in our communities and involved in the other, you know, the fightbacks that are going on more broadly in society, because they're going to take these things away from us, even the modest things that we do have. And so you don't have the luxury of just being the best teacher you can possibly be within the four walls of your classroom. We need you to join us in the struggle. But secondly, if you're really committed to social justice and social equality, then we actually need something of a different order. If you want to teach in a school system where it's really about this kind of enlightenment and empowerment and really sort of critical thinking, if you want that to be the norm rather than the exception, then we need to take a look at the economy in which our schools are situated and what we need to do to change and reform that economy, and we need people to join us in the struggle to completely rework the economic order and the economic hierarchy and who makes the decisions in our societies. And so we need all the best people who are these social justice educators to join us in that fight. And I'm going to turn it over to Jesse.
If you don't know Jesse here in Seattle, he's a high school history teacher at Garfield High School, where he's also the Black Student Union Advisor. He's written for a number of publications, the Seattle Times, the Progressive, Black Agenda Report, Common Dreams, Truth Out, and Counterpunch. And he's a founding member of the Social Equality Educators. Please give Jesse a big round of applause.
Thanks. I want to start by telling you the best day I ever had at school, which happened this school year. It was an incredible experience, and before I can describe why it was so amazing this day at Garfield High School, I got to give you some background into how we set up this day to occur. So, here in Washington State, the state constitution, the #1 law, the highest law of our land, what does it say? Education is the paramount duty of the state. It's the one thing that they have to do before they do anything else. They have to fund education, and there's been a series of lawsuits over the last few years that have gone to define what paramount duty means. The Basic Education Funding Act that says they have to give over half the budget in Washington State to education. And they've been breaking this law for year after year, decade after decade, and they get away with it. And so when Governor Gregoire announced that she was going to cut $2 billion from healthcare and education again this last year, we in the Social Equality Educators decided that this was a premeditated crime, not just any premeditated crime, but the highest crime you could commit in a state that says it's the paramount duty to fund education. And so my man Dan printed out this massive banner that says lawbreakers need to fully fund education, and we folded it up. I put it, actually I think I was wearing this jacket, and we put it in the back and snuck into the legislative session, and we unfurled the banner when they rang the gavel in at Olympia to start this legislative session. The banner is behind them on the news, and quickly the police come and grab us and usher us out, and they probably wish they would have arrested us there, because we found out the House Ways and Means Committee was about to meet just across the way, where they actually do the budget cutting. And so we got there quickly because we knew it was going to be hard to get in. There were thousands of people down there. It was the Occupy movement. Occupy Olympia showed up because they were protesting these budget cuts. Unions, our teachers union here, across the state was showing up, along with healthcare unions, all protesting. And so they shut the doors to that Ways and Means Committee meeting pretty quick. But I see a couple people who were in there with me. And we got in, and as soon as they started that session, we mic checked it and, you know, announced that this was a crime that was being committed, and that it was not only immoral, it was illegal under Washington state law. And we handed citizens arrest warrants up to them in the legislature. I even brought a pair of gray plastic handcuffs and asked them if they'd come with me. The police officer didn't think it was as funny as you guys did. And he grabbed me and wouldn't listen to my interpretation of the law, brought me back, but he couldn't get me out of the room because all the Occupy activists were surrounding. He said there'd be a riot if they brought me out there in handcuffs, so I had to sit in the back. And pretty soon, all the legislators actually came streaming back to where I was sitting because everyone was protesting so loudly when I was taken out that they couldn't continue the meeting. So now I'm sitting in the back of this room with all the legislators. I'm sitting there in handcuffs on the chair, and you know, I asked the legislator, "What's wrong with this picture here? What kind of society do we live in where a teacher who is asking for more funds so that the kids can come to school with decent supplies and they can get 4 years of science in their high school is sitting in handcuffs, and you, who have cut the budget year after year after year, breaking the highest law of the land, walk around free?" And the woman told me, "My mom was a teacher. I love education." I said, "If you cut the budget, please don't play that game with me," right? So I went to jail for the rest of the day, and I was really nervous because I had no idea what the parents of the kids in my class were going to think. And, you know, would they pull out their kid from a teacher who's a criminal? And, you know, what would the principal do? So I came to school the next day, and one of my students came running up to me. "Oh, you're out of jail, Mr. Hagopian. I set up a Facebook page called Free Mr. Hagopian." And I guess it worked. And he's like, "But now that you're out, we're switching it to walk out against the budget cuts." And the next day, in 24 hours, they had organized this mass demonstration at Garfield High School. Over 500 students walked out of class, and it wasn't just an excuse to skip class, because they actually printed up a pamphlet about what the cuts had done to Garfield High School. They talked about how summer school has been canceled in the Seattle Public Schools, which means the kids who fall behind the most can't get caught up, and that means they get left behind, right? They talked about how there isn't 4 years of science and language anymore, so those who are college-bound have to pay for those classes in community college, right? So guess who can afford to pay for the classes and can get on to college, right? So these were the demands they took and marched down to City Hall and demanded audience with the mayor, who actually came out and said they were doing the right thing, and they got their picture in the New York Times, and it turned out I was glad I did that. But that was the best day. Watching 500 students stream past me with banners saying "Fund Our Future" and chanting for their education, to me, was the pinnacle of my teaching experience, because a lot of these students were kids that I had last year that I had taught about the civil rights movement and all these social movements throughout history that have got us any democracy or any economic justice that we have has been brought by these struggles throughout history. And to see these kids applying those lessons, you know, you hope that one day they'll build a movement for justice with some of the lessons that you have, but I think watching them do it before my eyes was really overwhelming. And I think I learned a lot from this experience, and I think we got a lot out of it. And one, I think I learned that it's a lot more fun to teach as a criminal. Anyone who has a problem comes up to my class and is like, "Okay, what are we going to do about it?" And we can figure out how to organize around issues. There's a new culture at Garfield where AP kids who never interact with the largely students of color who are completely segregated within Garfield High School were marching together down there, and they had a new sense of that this was one school with a common purpose. And this was the first year they didn't cut the K-12 budget, and I think that the students at Garfield High School deserve some of the credit for putting on the pressure on these legislators who knew the consequences of what could erupt into a social movement. And so I want to just say a couple things about this experience, look at it in terms of some of the things that are written about in this book, because I think what we're arguing is to be a social justice educator requires that you both do radical pedagogy, right, the practice of teaching in your classroom, but it also requires that you engage in class struggle unionism, that you actually engage in activism and protest. And so in the book there's a chapter on Paulo Freire and his ideas about pedagogy, from pedagogy of the oppressed, and he writes about two kinds of teaching, the banking model of teaching and the problem posing or dialogic model of teaching. The banking model of teaching is the one where the teacher knows everything and deposits the information into the minds of the students in a very mechanical formulation. The problem posing model of education is summed up in the book by Adrian and Elizabeth like this. They say, in problem-posing education, as the name suggests, the world is not presented as a fact, but as a problem, a living entity in a constant state of becoming. Because it is unfinished, it cannot simply be known, it must be interpreted. One of the jobs of the teacher is to figure out how to present the student's world to them as something to be solved. Dialogical education, also as the name suggests, consists of a dialogue or a series of dialogues between the student and teacher, between the students and other students, and between the students and the world, and so on. Unlike the banking education, dialogical education does not assume that the teacher has all the funds and that the students' accounts are empty, right? And this year has been incredible for inside the classroom, because now when we study social movements, we can look at their own experience. What were you willing to risk when you walked out of class? How do you think the people in the women's suffrage movement, what were they had to risk? And they can understand the social movements at a much higher level. But the other really important thing is struggle. And Paulo Freire talks about ontological vocation of humanity, meaning the completion of ourselves as human beings through education. And he would argue that you can only get this type of education through struggle, through actually engaging in activism. And that the idea is that you can't fix schools without fixing the society which they exist in, as Sarah argued, right? So how, I might have incredible lessons, right? But how can a student do homework if their home is foreclosed on and they don't have a home, right? I mean, Trayvon Martin might have had the best teachers in the world, but how are you going to educate your students when they get gunned down in the street and nothing gets done about it, right? So you have to fix the society as well that the schools are part of. And I want to argue that I think the best place for teachers to start, where we can be powerful in affecting broad economic changes and social and political changes in our society, is getting active in your union with other teachers who are facing similar attacks. Because I think the 1% in our society know the power of struggle, and they fear our unions, the potential of our unions, not as they currently exist, but they know that our unions are powerful. You heard Rob Page, the Secretary of Education under George W. Bush, call my union a terrorist organization, right? And then, see, the thing is, now under Obama, he doesn't come out and say a terrorist organization. He's a lot smarter than that, right? More clever. But the message is really similar. He says, Barack Obama said in a speech on education, it's time to start rewarding good teachers and stop making excuses for bad ones. I reject a system that rewards failure and protects a person from its consequences, right? And the message is that the teachers' unions are there to protect bad teachers, right? And that he rejects a system that, that won't, punish bad teachers. What really gets me about this is that I would love to hear that same system-rejecting appeal when it comes to CEOs who are getting golden parachutes, bankers who are getting bailed out, right? I reject a system that bails out wealthy people, but of course, most of his... Oh man, thank you. You want to say hello? All right, let Daddy finish and I'll be right back. We're fighting for your future. How do we, right on. So why is this attack so vicious? Why is it so bipartisan, both Republicans and Democrats? Why are they coming after the teachers' union so much? I don't think it has anything to do with getting rid of bad teachers. I think in a society that spends, our country spends $100,000 every minute of the day to wage war on Afghanistan, a society that mobilizes that much resources to bomb children in the Middle East, but is laying off 6,000 teachers in LA, can't seriously think that it's the teachers' unions that's wrong with education, right? They know that they are systematically underfunding our schools, and they know teachers' unions have nothing to do with eroding the quality of education. So why then is there such a massive attack on education? I would argue that with the state of the labor movement in collapse, there's only 11.9% of workers who are in a union in America, and the teachers' unions are the biggest unions in the United States by far. We have 1.4 million members of the American Federation of Teachers and 3.2 million in the National Education Association. This is the largest sector of unionized workers in the United States today. And from the perspective of the politicians and the bankers and the captains of industry who direct our economy, busting the teachers' union is a key component to getting away with slashing salaries and benefits and pensions in cash-strapped states, right? So I think part of it is, instead of making the bankers pay for the crisis that they created, it is we need to destroy the largest public sector union, largest union period, that is a draw on funds from state economies. But I think it's even bigger than that. I think that the unprecedented attack on our union is about a fundamental restructuring of the American economy right now. And we're in a society where it's harder and harder for the capitalists to make a profit, to find profitable industries. I think they want to restructure our economy to be able to compete with China and Chinese low-wage economy. And to do that, they have to destroy the largest organized labor sector of the economy. There can't be an example of workers who have some decent pay to get by. There can't be an example of workers that have some vacation time, some health care benefits, because if there's a mass block of that, other people might want that and fight for that. And I think this is about lowering the standard of workers across the board to be able to compete internationally. And so this is a massive attack that we're facing. We have the 1% lined up saying we are going to continue to be the 1% and increase our wealth at the expense of the 99%. And to do that, we're going to bust your union. And to stand up to that attack, it's going to take a lot of organization, and it's going to take rebuilding our unions on a completely different model. There's two general schemes you can think about how unions are organized. The first one is partnership and collaboration, and that's the one that you all are probably the most familiar with, the one that we're faced with every day. This is the idea that we hear from our union presidents all too often, that unions and management, we have common interests, we should share work together, that we should share the sacrifice, that what's good for the company is good for you. You know, this is basically also known as business unionism. And you sit down at a table and you negotiate, you get the best you can, but we're in hard times, so we got to make concessions often. Okay? The other model of unionism is class struggle unionism, and that's the model that built the labor movement, that fought in the 1930s and shut down cities across America to win a pension, to win welfare, to win the right to unionize, that created decent working class jobs in this country. And that model is far too often not part of the labor movement today. But there's really important, I think, examples of teachers and others around the country that have begun to fight back. The Tacoma teachers know about class struggle unionism and the power it can have. When you all were, voted to go on strike to keep your pay and your seniority, the judge came in and said, I'm going to slap you with a $10,000 fine each to the teachers in Tacoma. This is how serious they are at demolishing our unions. And what did the Tacoma teachers say? Bring it on. What are you going to do? How are you going to keep this school system running without us? It's not like a politician's going to get down and go in a classroom. It's not like Bill Gates would even know what to say. So they can't run it without us. And the Tacoma teachers found that out, and they went on strike and won that strike. And we're very glad they did, because it revives a model that I think we need to bring about across this country if we're going to win this battle. And this, here in Seattle, we have the social equality educators. There's, the grassroots education movement in New York. There's CORE in Chicago that actually won the election there and is now running the union and is gearing up for a big strike in Chicago that I think could transform the labor movement and what teachers think is possible to fight for and win. And I really am looking forward to following and building solidarity for the teachers in Chicago on that. And I think one of the most inspiring moments of class struggle unionism was what happened in Wisconsin when Governor Walker said he was going to strip collective bargaining rights, and teachers basically went on a wildcat strike, a sick out, and went to occupy the Capitol before the Occupy movement, and inspired the rest of the labor movement. And so many lessons to draw out of that, right? They had, it wasn't just the teachers, then the firefighters, and they were joined by union after union and activists and parents and students who came to their aid and occupied the Capitol and completely changed the debate and showed the power that working people have to redirect the economy along our lines. Now, unfortunately, the union leadership of that struggle decided that the best thing to do would be to demobilize that occupation and begin a petition campaign to recall Walker a year later, right? And I think we need to look back at the 1930s and see that the sit-down strikes in Flint, Michigan built the CIO and built any semblance of decent wages and benefits, and began much more militant tactics. And I think, there was discussion in Wisconsin at that time of a general strike, of all the workers going on strike. And I think that would have been far more effective a way to challenge Scott Walker. He would have learned what the Tacoma school district learned, that nothing runs without our labor, right? And that they are powerless when we are united and have solidarity. And that's something I think that we want to fight for. And I want to wrap up on this. I think one of the most inspiring parts of the Wisconsin struggle was when a statement was sent from Tahrir Square Because remember, the Egyptian revolution was going on at this time, where the masses of Egyptian people showed that nothing runs without our labor. They, shut down the factories across Egypt. They occupied Tahrir Square, and they demanded democracy. And they were paying attention to Wisconsin, and they sent Kamal Abbas, the organizer in the Egyptian Revolution and general coordinator of the Center for Trade Unions and Workers' Services in Egypt. He sent good advice to the public sector workers of Wisconsin. In a message of solidarity, he wrote this. It was read out on the loudspeaker in the rotunda of the Capitol building there. He said, "I'm speaking to you from a place very close to Tahrir Square in Cairo, Liberation Square, which is the heart of the revolution in Egypt. This is the place where many of our youth paid with their lives and blood in the struggle for our just rights. From this place, I want you to know that we stand with you as you stood with us. I want you to know that no power can challenge the will of the people when they believe in their rights, when they raise their voice loud and clear and struggle against exploitation. No one believed that our revolution could succeed against the strongest dictatorship in the region. But in just 18 days, the revolution achieved the victory of the people. When the working class of Egypt joined the revolution on the 9th and 10th of February, the dictatorship was doomed and the victory of the people became inevitable. We want you to know that we stand with you on your side. Stand firm, don't waver, don't give up on your rights. Victory belongs to the people who stand firm and demand their rights. And that's what we need to start doing here.